It's the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 28, looking at the groups and teams of the 2024 Copa America. This episode is looking at the players of Mexico. Here we go! Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and this is Series 28 on the players of the 2024 Copa America. This episode covers Mexico's players. We're doing this mediacast in two parts. Part one here is a look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. We examine the participation of players in games over the recent period, as well as a couple of other factors to categorize them into definite, likely, possible, and so on. Part two will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad is selected. And at that time, we'll go back over the list we create here and see who made it and who didn't. And we'll also cover things like injuries and surprise selections. So this episode will have three sections. Section one, where we look at some general information on the team. Section two, where we cover the main candidates in each position. And section three, where we summarize and conclude. All right, let's move on to section one then, and we begin with some team information, some comments on the squad, namely retirements first. So we have a few big names retiring for them. The first one is Andres Guardado. He played his last game in the World Cup there in 2022 and was captain of the team. He retired with 179 caps and 28 goals. Wow. A career spanning from 2005 to 2022. And he is now 38 years old. So actually still playing for Leon in Mexico, but not part of the squad. Actually announced his retirement in mid-May of 2023. Next, we have central defender Hector Morena. He retired with 132 caps and 5 goals and is 36 years old now and still playing also for Monterrey in Mexico. So a lot of those, these two players had played in Europe and returned to Mexico at the end here. And yes, we don't have time to go over all the tournaments that these players played in, but it's a pretty impressive list. So Hector Moreno, not part of their recent games, hasn't actually officially announced any retirement, but hasn't been called up since the 2022 World Cup. And actually he, like Andre Guardado, did not participate in the 2023 Gold Cup last summer. Finally, we have Jesus Manuel Corona. He's only 31 years old, but we're going to put him in this list because he hasn't appeared for the national team since June of 2022. He was injured for the World Cup and for the Gold Cup in 2023, so there is a chance of him coming back, but hasn't been called up recently. Jesus Manuel Corona with 71 caps and 10 goals, also still playing, and he too has gone back to Mexico and is playing for Monterrey in his second stint with them. Finally, we have central defender Néstor Araujo, and he had 67 caps for the national team and 3 goals. 32 years old, maybe 33 years old there, and since 2011 with the national team, Néstor Araujo, and playing in Mexico as he always did. Still playing at the club level for Copa America in Mexico there. And he last appeared in the 2022 World Cup on the bench. So he too was not selected. Actually, he was selected for the preliminary squad for the Gold Cup in 2023, but didn't make the final cut there. And he did start 3 games after the World Cup, but has not been on the team recently. Those are our 4 retirees, really big names for Mexico. Let's take a look at Mexico's club affiliation without going into too much detail here. I'd say about 75% to 80% play in Mexico, which is a very healthy league. In fact, for a lot of countries in South America, the Mexican League is a bit of a step up, and they also have some North American and European players coming to play there as well as South Americans. Some of the bigger names, though, are with clubs in Europe. Probably the biggest is right back Jorge Sanchez with Porto in Portugal. And we have Edson Alvarez, actually captain of Mexico now, with West Ham in England. A couple of other clubs represented, not really top level in Europe, but fairly high. Dinamo Moscow in Russia, AEK Athens in Greece, and Feyenoord in Netherlands, Almere in Spain, those kind of clubs. I won't get into naming Mexican clubs because there'd be a bit of a slippery slope, and I'd have Mexican fans saying, well, why didn't you mention my club as one of the bigger names there? So that is just an overview of Mexico's club affiliation. Let's move on to recent games. And so we are looking at participation of players from the start of 2023. That could also be said as the end of the 2022 World Cup. Mexico has played a staggering 22 games since then, up until March 2024, and we're looking at the participation in players over that period. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to formation, because we won't be examining all of those games closely. In terms of recent participation in tournaments, Mexico has been involved in the World Cup every time over the past recent while, and in the Gold Cup, of course, they usually qualify automatically for that one. They've also taken part in some Copa Americas. The 2016 Copa America Centenario was like this tournament, kind of North, Central, and South America wide, and in the past they did take part in Copa America. So that actually made the team quite complex, because often they were fielding 2 separate teams every summer, and so they had a massive squad to deal with. That is actually being resolved a little bit here, as I'll talk about later. Okay, those are the games. Let's talk about their recent formations. Their usual formation about 50% of the time over those 22 games. I think I included them all, or may have. No, I didn't include some of the friendlies, which we'll talk about soon. But anyway, in the games we're examining, 50% have been a 4-3-3 formation. So if you kind of keep that in mind in your head as we're going through, we've actually kind of organized the players mostly according to that system. 50% of the time, or 10 of 20 games that we're looking at, those actually include the World Cup, because our kind of look at the squad goes back to the World Cup. So I think we're ignoring 6 friendlies in there. In 30% of the games, it's a 4-2-3-1 formation, so they use that quite often. And then 20% of the time they use a single formation. So in other words, in 4 of the 20 games, they used 4 different formations once each time. In 2 of those formations, there was a 3-man back line, but usually Mexico doesn't do that. As you see with the 4-3-3 and the 4-2-3-1, it's usually 2 central defenders and a left back and a right back. In the 3-man defense, those left back and right back may push up to be wingers, but that's very rare for Mexico, and they didn't do it in any of their major games, actually. So there, the 4-3-3, 50% of the time, a 4-2-3-1, 30% of the time, and then 20% of the time, another formation. We're going to just talk a little bit about the games that they've played since the beginning of 2023, because we will be considering some of them and not considering some of them. So we do consider the World Cup games. We know that's definitely their A team, so it's a good place to start. After that, in March of 2023, they played a couple of Nations League group stage games. And then in April and the beginning of June, they played a couple of friendlies. We're largely ignoring that and actually taking it from the mid-June 2023 games. Those were the Nations League finals. We know that they were fielding their best team, at least in the semi-final they did, not so much in the third place match there. After that, we have the Gold Cup, and they did send their A team to that. And 6 games there. And in the fall, so that was in July, by the way, June and July 2023. In the fall of 2023, in September and October, we have a couple of, we have 3 friendlies, 4 friendlies, I should say. We didn't consider those too much. Those friendlies were quite experimental, and they had all sorts of players being used. So we were trying to focus on games where we were seeing their A team there, and we did see it in the we did not see it so much in the first game of November 2023. Those were 2 games against Honduras, which was qualifying for this tournament. Surprisingly, they didn't really put out their best squad for the first of those games and actually lost to Honduras. They definitely put out their best squad for the second one. After that, we had a friendly in December, which we're mostly ignoring. So all the friendlies, basically. And finally, we have the CONCACAF Nations League finals. These are the 2024 finals in March of 2024. So we think they put out their best squad for those teams, and actually we're pretty sure that we are choosing games that are their best squad. Okay, that is it for section 1. A bit of information. No, we have one more order of business. That is upcoming games. So they have 3 friendlies due Mexico as a warm-up for the tournament. Most teams don't have 3. Bolivia is their first one on May 31st. And then they play Uruguay and Brazil. I just want to see where those games are. I should have made a note of that. I think the Bolivia game is in Mexico on May 31st. No, I'm wrong. That is in USA. So a lot of teams are coming to play their friendlies in the USA. The first one there against Bolivia in Chicago. Second against Uruguay. Is being played at Mile High Stadium in Denver, so maybe acclimatizing themselves to some thin air there. And the third one in Texas, where, of course, they'll have a lot of fans. They're playing against Brazil there on June 8th. So pretty exciting warm-up games. And, well, we don't really need the warm-up games, honestly, to know what their squad is, but more of that to come in part 2 or section 2, where we look at the candidates. Let's move on to that and begin with the manager. So the current manager, Jaime Lozano, has been their manager since 2023. So I'll give a bit of bio on Lozano. He was a player for Mexico from 2000 to 2008, and he had 33 caps and 12 goals in his international career, and played for teams in Mexico. He was part of the Copa America 2004 and 2007, and the Confederations Cup in 2005. All right, sorry about that. And before becoming Mexico's national team manager, he was with a team in Honduras, Necaxa in Honduras, and with the under-23 team of Mexico before that. Prior to that, he was with Mexican teams, not always in a managerial level, actually, sometimes an assistant manager or an academy manager. So he did take them through the Gold Cup in 2023, which they won, and remains on as their manager. Prior to him, we had mostly Gerardo Martino, And I won't spend much time here. Martino has managed several international teams, but Mexico, from the 2019 Gold Cup all the way to the 2022 World Cup, that includes the 2021 Gold Cup there. So 3 tournaments by Gerardo Martino. And he left after they finished in the group stage in the 2022 World Cup and was replaced by Diego Coca. And Diego Coca is just there for a short time. So actually I have a summary of this, so I'll just go over it then. So Gerardo Martino managed from 2019 to 2022. And after their group stage finish in the World Cup, he was replaced by Coca. Coca did not last long. He did poorly in the 2023 Nations League finals. As we saw, that was in June of 2023, and he was fired before the 2023 Gold Cup, which started shortly after. So Lozano came in as the interim manager and led them through the 2023 Gold Cup, which they won. And so after the tournament, they kept on Jaime Lozano as the manager. And so he will lead them through this tournament. And let's move on to goalkeepers. We'll look at our candidates here. And our at the definite level, we have Guillermo Ochoa. He is captain of the team. I think I said a different player was captain for a while, but Guillermo is the captain of the team. And actually, I think his captaincy might have been taken away because he was off the team for a little while. I will just check. No, Edson Alvarez is the captain, so I guess Ochoa has lost that role. Anyway, Guillermo Ochoa. Now, I'm going to say here that we won't go into too much detail on the players here. A lot of them have long histories with tons of tournaments under their belt. And we've covered Mexico actually 3 times now. We covered them for 2022 World Cup qualifying, then for the 2022 World Cup, and then for the 2023 Gold Cup. So we did give more details in that. We felt it was maybe too many details. So we're going to keep it actually quite short here. But if you want fuller details, I recommend the 2022 World Cup preview of Mexico for that one. So we will give a little bio though. So Ochoa, Guillermo Ochoa. We'll come back and do the bio. I'll announce the candidates first. So he's at the definite level, Ochoa, and so is Luis Malagon. We have no players at the likely level, but at the possible level, Jose Antonio Rodriguez. And then really, I'm just going to list the names of players who are seemingly off the squad or are retired. David Ochoa, seemingly off the squad. So is Rodolfo Cota and Miguel Jimenez. And then basically retired is Alfredo Talavera, longtime backup goalkeeper for the squad, but no longer in the picture. Let's go back and look at the ones who are then. Guillermo Ochoa now has 151 caps. He's been with Mexico since 2005 and is 38 years old. He's playing for Salernitana in Italy since 2022, and just a massive history of tournaments that he's been involved in. We'll just mention the last 2. He was a starter in the 2022 World Cup and in the 2023 Gold Cup. At least at that time he was captain. Seems to have lost it since. In terms of recent participation, he started 16 of their 22 games since the 2022 World Cup. He was injured for 2 and not selected for 4, so still starting most of their games. And we'll see in the summary most of their important games. The second definite candidate is Luis Malagon. So he is 27 years old and has been with Mexico just since 2023 there, with 4 caps and no goals. He plays for Copa America in Mexico since 2023, has always played in Mexico. And his first tournament was the Gold Cup in 2023 last summer, where he was one of the backup keepers. And in terms of participation, he actually did appear once on the bench in 2022, but since the start of 2023 has started 3 of their games, subbed in for 1, and was on the bench for 15 of them. So he is pretty much always called up, Luis Malagon, and so we think he's a definite candidate, although not a starter. No likely candidate, but possible candidate is Jose Antonio Rodriguez, and because he's the only one, maybe his likelihood goes up a little bit. Rodriguez is 32 years old, and new to the team, though, since 2023, just like Malagon. He has 2 caps for Mexico and plays for Tijuana in Mexico since 2023. A long-time player for Guadalajara in Mexico before that. He too was the backup keeper for the 2023 Gold Cup, and one of the backup keepers on the bench for that tournament. And he actually got his first appearance just before that tournament in March 2023 and started 1 game as well as subbing in for 1. He was on the bench, though, for 18 games. So Jose Antonio Rodriguez, I should have put him as a likely candidate, given that he's been called up so much. In fact, I think I will move him up to the likely level, because we don't really have any other candidates below, and we're going to see this for Mexico, that they've really shaved down the squad. So in the past, when they were playing 2 tournaments in a summer, we just had a massive squad. We couldn't really always separate from A players and B players. Now, Mexico is looking more like a small country like Hungary or something, where it's just a steady group of players. So that's obviously a decision they've made. And we see a lot of those players dropping off the team. If you look on their Wikipedia page, it's still a massive list of players there. But really, for their starters, they're kind of going with the same players. So we're going to see that throughout. And I'll stop yakking about it and get on to central defenders. No, I won't. I will talk about the summary of the goalkeeper position. So Ochoa started all 3 games of the World Cup and almost all important games since. He was replaced by Malagon in the first of 2 games that was qualifying for this tournament. We saw against Honduras in November there, and otherwise Malagon replaced him in 2 friendlies. And I think Rodriguez's starts or appearances were also in friendlies. So it's basically Ochoa all the way, with Malagon seeming like the backup keeper here. Okay, on to defenders, and we'll talk a little bit about the position before we launch into the players. So central defender is almost always 2 players, so almost always a 4-man back line, as we saw in section 1, with 2 central defenders and a right and left back, which we'll get to shortly. Only in 2 games did they use a 3-man back line. One of those was actually in the World Cup against Argentina. The other time they used it was in the 3rd place match of the 2023 Nations League, and manager Coca got fired after that. So it kind of has a bad aura around it, perhaps. Okay, let's look at the candidates for central defense. We begin with Johan Vasquez as a definite candidate. Cesar Montes as a likely candidate. And that's it. Oh my goodness. Teams usually bring 5 or 6 players, but those are the only 2 that seem above the possible level. We have a few at the possible but unlikely level. And Israel Reyes and Gilberto Sepulveda. And then we have off the squad, we talked about him in part 1, seemingly retired, Nestor Araujo. And sorry, I should have put him a bit later. We have Victor Guzman as seemingly off the squad. Then, yes, 2 retired or players we're considering retired, Nestor Araujo and Hector Morena. Neither of those participating in the recent period. So, yes, what are they going to do? Let's talk about the candidates here. First of all, Johan Vazquez. He's 25 years old and joined Mexico in 2019 with 22 caps and 1 goal, and he plays for Genoa in Italy. Yes, he was on the roster for the 2022 World Cup there, just on the bench for that. He had actually made the preliminary team for the 2021 Gold Cup, but not the final cut. So a bench player for the World Cup in 2022 and a starter in the Gold Cup in 2023. He has since started, Johan Vazquez, has since started 15 of their 22 games. I'm trying to mention the name a couple of times so that people can reorient themselves if they need to. Johan Vazquez started 15 of their 22 games since the 2022 World Cup. He was on the bench for three games and not selected for 4 matches there. So a definite candidate, Johan Vazquez. Cesar Montes is a likely candidate. He's 27 years old and has 45 caps and 1 goal since 2017, and he plays for Almeria in Spain since 2023, and has been part of tournaments since the 2017 Gold Cup. Not selected for the 2018 World Cup though, and yes, not always selected for tournaments. Usually is a starter in World Cup 2022, and became a starter in the Gold Cup in 2023 in the final stages of that tournament. Montes is or has started 11 of their 22 games over the period. However, there were 10 games that he was not selected for. Nevertheless, we do think Cesar Montes is a likely candidate here. Part of the reason for that is just the lack of other candidates. Let's take a quick look at the possible but unlikely candidate, Israel, or 2 candidates. Israel Reyes was selected for the Gold Cup there. He was just on the B team there. They played a B team in Game 3 against Qatar. Over this period, he started 7 of their 22 games, but was not selected for 8 of the last 9 matches. That's why we have to put him as a possible but unlikely. Gilberto Sepulveda was part of the 2021 Gold Cup squad as a substitute, but not selected for the 2022 World Cup and just on the preliminary squad for the 2023 Gold Cup. Over the recent period, he did start 2 of their 22 games, and however, not selected for most of them, including the last 7 matches. So I did kind of research to see who's been starting for them in the friendlies and stuff, and well, I'll talk about that in the summary, which we'll do right away here. But certainly kind of expecting to see some new names in the June friendlies, or else some players coming back. But I'll tell you what's been happening in a summary of the position here. It was Hector Moreno and Cesar Montes in all 3 games of the World Cup. And I did mention they had a 3-man back line against Argentina, and it was Nestor Araujo joining them there. But Moreno and Araujo were gone after that, and they struggled in the 2023 Nations League finals. They used 4 different defenders over those 2 games. Montes was out for the group stage of the Gold Cup, but he returned for the final stages, playing alongside Vazquez. Vazquez started all of the games in that cup except the Game 3 B team game against Qatar. So it was Montes and Vazquez who remained the starting pair through the November 2023 games and the March 2024 Nations League games. So really, they're the only ones who have been playing. Montes and Vazquez then look like clear starters. When someone else does come in, it's the defensive midfielder Edson Alvarez, who we'll meet soon. He seems to be the main backup. Beyond that, it's difficult to see who else they're going to select. They've been trying out some new games in the friendlies in the fall there in September and October, but none of them seem to have stuck much. So I'm anxiously awaiting to see what they're going to do, and that'll be interesting in the June games to see probably who will be on the bench there, but at least a few more names to call up to the squad. Okay, over to left back, and just a quick summary of the position there. So always there is a left back because it's a four-man defense. We don't often see the left back pushing up to right winger. Just two games where they had a three-man back line where they did that. Otherwise, it's a left back. And here we have a definite candidate in Jesus Gallardo. And beyond that, we have a no likely candidate, but a possible candidate in Gerardo Arteaga, and then two possible but unlikely candidates in Jesus Alberto Angulo and Omar Campos. This time I won't detail those players. I only did that for central defense because of the lack of candidates there. So we'll just put out the names here and then give more detail if they end up being selected. Okay, and then we have one player seemingly off the squad in Salvador Reyes. That's based on their participation. So just two candidates to look at in more detail here. Jesus Gallardo is 29 years old, and he has 90 caps and 2 goals. 99 caps and 2 goals since 2016. So I think in the June friendlies, he'll become a Centurion. He plays for Monterrey in Mexico since 2018 and has been part of several tournaments. I'll just cover the last two, though. A starter in the World Cup and a starter in the 2023 Gold Cup there. So he is their definite starter. In the recent period, he started 16 of their 22 games, as well as subbing in for one and being on the bench for 3. So Jesus Gallardo really a firm grip on the left back position here. The other player here is Gerardo Arteaga at the possible level. He is 26 years old and 33 caps and 1 goal since 2018. And he has come back to Mexico, having played for Genk in Belgium for 4 years. He came back to play for Monterrey in Mexico since 2024. Had trouble getting onto the tournament teams until the World Cup, where he was on the bench and also was a kind of a B team player or a substitute in the 2023 Gold Cup. Gerardo Arteaga. Bit difficult for him to get ahead of Jesus Gallardo there. So Arteaga started only 3 of their 22 games since the 2022 World Cup. He also subbed in for 2 and was on the bench for 7. So he does seem the backup player to Gallardo here. Actually, we'll summarize the position, and that's pretty much what I'm going to say. It's Gallardo starting in all 3 games of the World Cup, and almost always it's been him in this position since. Usually when he's replaced, it is by Arteaga. Arteaga took the position 3 times in all, but generally in less important games like the Gold Cup B team game, game 3 against Qatar there. Okay, that is left back, and over on the right, we don't have a definite candidate, but we have 2 likely candidates. The first one is Jorge Sanchez, and the second one is Julian Araujo, not to be confused with Nestor Araujo, who is off the squad. We also have a possible but unlikely candidate in Kevin Alvarez. So we won't talk much about Kevin Alvarez. He was not selected for 14 of the 22 matches, so there's a chance of him coming in, but more likely the 2 candidates we will give details on. Jorge Sanchez is 26 years old and has 41 caps and 1 goal since 2019 for Mexico. And he plays for, well, he's on the roster for Ajax in the Netherlands since 2022, but actually has been on loan to Porto in Portugal, as we said in section 1. Been with Porto since 2023. So was injured for the 2019 Gold Cup, but was a starter in the and didn't make the final cut for the 2021 Gold Cup, but was a starter in the World Cup in at least in 2 of the 3 games there in 2022, and a starter in the 2023 Gold Cup as well. So he kind of increasingly is taking the position over the past since the beginning of 2023. He started 13 of the 22 games there. And although there were 8 matches that he wasn't selected for, so not guaranteed in this position, but a likely candidate. The other likely candidate is Julian Araujo. He's just 22 years old and has 14 caps since 2021. He actually played 1 game for the USA in 2020 before committing to Mexico. He plays for Barcelona B in Spain since 2023, and he's been on loan to Las Palmas in Spain since 2023. He was actually on the preliminary squad for the Gold Cup in 2021, not for Mexico, but for the USA, and didn't make the final cut there. And for Mexico, he was selected for the Gold Cup, not the World Cup in 2022. He was selected for the Gold Cup in 2023 there. He was a substitute in that tournament, so he started game 3 against Qatar. Since then, he started 5 of their 2022 games, as well as subbing in for 5 and being on the bench for 7. So reliably called up, but not necessarily a starter, Julian Araujo. Okay, let's take a look at the position. So in the World Cup, it was Jorge Sanchez twice, but actually our possible but unlikely candidate, Kevin Alvarez, once. After that, Jorge Sanchez played most of the important games. When he was replaced, it was mostly by Araujo. And again, that was being replaced for less important matches, like the 3rd place match of the 2023 Nations League finals and that B team in the Gold Cup game 3. So Jorge Sanchez, not as firm a grip on the position as Gallardo on the left, but quite a strong grip there. That brings us to the end of defence, and let's move on to defensive midfielders. And lo and behold, we have no players coded as defensive midfield. They're all coded as central midfielders. We actually had to move them around just to try to distinguish them a little bit. But I'll get to that after talking about the position here. So as we saw, it's a 4-3-3 formation 50% of the time. So we're going to treat that 4-3-3 formation as a single central midfielder, and then we've created separate sections for the left and right midfielders there. If teams don't use that formation much, we kind of combine them. But for Mexico, we distinguish those positions. We also have them using the 4-2-3-1 formation about 30% of the time. In that case, we're talking about 2 players in the central midfield. And I should warn ahead of time that we see a lot of shifting of position in here. So we're talking about generalities. If a player is playing in the center, you can almost be sure that he has played on the right or on the left, or even as an attacking midfielder, perhaps. But we're talking about generalities here. So let's go. We begin with central midfielders then. So think about the very center of the field. Usually the center player of a 3-man midfield. We have Edson Alvarez as a definite candidate here in central midfield. And we have also Luis Romo as a definite candidate. And we have a bunch of other players who we'll get to a bit later, coded as central midfielders, but we've moved them around a bit. So those two candidates, plus we want to mention that Hector Herrera is here too, and he's actually a possible but unlikely candidate. I'll just deal with him quickly here. He did come back actually after a 10-month absence following the World Cup, missing the Gold Cup there, but came back in September 2023 and started one of their remaining 9 games and was on the bench for one. But then he got injured for 2 matches and was not selected for the for 5 matches. I think for 7 matches in all. So Hector Herrera seems to be off the squad. I did actually read one article that said he had retired after the 2022 World Cup. So obviously that's not true, but he's certainly moving towards it. The other possible but unlikely is Marcel Ruiz. He's a new player, and we won't talk about him more unless he is selected. And then we have a couple of players seemingly off the squad, and that is Fernando Beltran and Alan Cervantes. Again, we'll get more details on those players if they are named to the final squad. Let's look at the ones that we think will be named, though. Edson Alvarez, we think, is a definite. He's 26 years old and 77 caps and 4 goals for Mexico since 2017. And he is with West Ham in England since 2023. And he was with Ajax in the Netherlands. Mexico seems to have a bit of a connection with Ajax because several players have gone through there in their journey towards Europe. So Edson Alvarez, veteran of many tournaments since the 2017 Gold Cup, and he was a starter in 2 of the 3 games of the World Cup, and was a definite starter in the 2023 Gold Cup there. Since the beginning of 2023, he started 15 of their 22 games and not selected for 5 matches. So we consider him a definite candidate here. The other one is Luis Romo. He's probably the most versatile player. We see him shifting around a bit more than the other players. The other players we can kind of nail down to one position, but if we're flexible. But Luis Romo does play kind of various positions in the midfield, even as an attacking midfielder. Luis Romo is 29 years old, and he has 44 caps and 3 goals for Mexico since 2019. And he plays for Monterrey in Mexico since 2022. He's always played in Mexico. And his first tournament was the World Cup in 2022. He wasn't chosen for the Gold Cup in 2021 because he was on the Olympic squad there. So on the bench for the World Cup, but a starter in the 2023 Gold Cup, one of the few players actually to start all 6 games, even the B team game there. And since then, Romo has started 12 of their 22 games, and he has subbed in 5 and been on the bench for 2. So just 3 matches that he wasn't selected for. So even though he starts only half the games, we consider him a definite candidate for being named to the squad. All right, those are the only 2 we'll deal with here. We've moved other players to other positions, so now we can summarize this defensive midfielder position. So it was Edson Alvarez in the first game of the Cup, and then Hector Herrera, who is now pretty much out of the picture. In the third game, it was a 2-man position. It was Edson Alvarez and Luis Chavez, who we'll meet soon. We're going to treat him as a left midfielder in our organization system here. But anyway, Alvarez and Chavez effectively rotated in the position after. However, when it was a two-man position, it was usually Chavez on the left and Romo on the right. But towards the end, it was primarily a single position, and it was primarily Edson Alvarez in that position. And there was more variation in the friendlies, but we're not going to dwell on the friendlies because it becomes a bit of a spider's web there. Okay, so Edson Alvarez, our main man here. Let's move on to upfield to the left midfield position. And here we have definite candidate Luis Chavez, who we just mentioned. He's actually coded as a central midfielder. And he is definite, and no likely candidates, but a possible candidate in Eric Aguiar. And then we have a couple of players off the squad or retired. Diego Lainez in the seemingly off the squad. Eric Gutierrez also seemingly off the squad. And retired Andres Guardado, who we talked about in section 1. So those are our candidates here. So we're only going to take a close look at the first two. Luis Chavez, he's 28 years old and has been with Mexico since 2022 with 30 caps and 4 goals. And he plays for Dinamo Moscow in Russia since 2023. He was in Mexico before that. And his first tournament, after not being selected for the preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup. He was selected for the preliminary squad. That was a 60-man preliminary squad, so I think I even made it onto that squad. Chavez didn't make the cut down to 45 players for that one, but in the World Cup 2022, he was a starter for all 3 games there, and same in the 2023 Gold Cup, starting all games except the B team game. Chavez has since started 15 of their 22 games since the 2022 World Cup, as well as subbing in for 3, just 4 matches that he was not selected for, and so we consider him a definite candidate for this Cup. The possible candidate is Eric Aguiar, and he is 27 years old, and just 14 caps for him since 2018, no goals, and has never been selected for a tournament there. Again, 2021, like Romo, he was selected for the Olympic squad. Instead, that seems to have been his closest shave with the tournament. For this tournament, he returned after a 21-month absence in March 2024, so off the team for almost 2 years. He didn't start either of their games, their recent games there, but he was subbed in for one and on the bench for the other. So even possible, maybe a bit generous for him. But really, he seems the only other candidate here. When Chavez is not playing in the position, we see rotation among the other midfielders we have, particularly Pinedo coming into it. I was supposed to say that until the the summary. Here we go with the summary. In the cup, it was Chavez playing, and then Guardado playing his last game in this position. I do have Chavez as starting and finishing all 3 games, so I think, yes, they did kind of switch around in the midfield there. But on the left, it was Chavez and then Guardado there, and the position was not used in Game 3 of the World Cup. After the Cup, it was primarily Chavez when they used this formation, the 4-3-3. When it was the 4-2-3-1, Chavez also tended to play as the right defensive midfielder there. And Eric Sanchez was his replacement. Toward the end, though, Pinedo, who we're going to meet as a left attacking player, sometimes playing in this position as well. Okay, we move on to the same position on the right. So right midfielder, think of the 4-3-3 formation, and in the middle three, the player on the right. And here we have Eric Sanchez as the definite candidate, and the only candidate here. So let's take a look. Eric Sanchez, he is 24 years old and he has 27 caps and 3 goals for Mexico since 2021. And he plays for Pachuca in Mexico for a long time, since 2016. Sanchez was a substitute in the 2021 Gold Cup, but not selected for the World Cup in 2022. He was named to the preliminary squad. That was just a 31-man preliminary squad, so he came pretty close, but not the final cut there. But he was a starter in about half of the games in the 2023 Gold Cup. So since the start of 2023, he started 13 of their 22 games, so a little more than half, as well as subbing in for 6. So just 2 games that he wasn't selected for, he was on the bench for 1, if you're adding up the numbers to 22. And Eric Sanchez, a definite candidate to make the squad, not necessarily a starter. So to summarize this position, in the World Cup, it was actually Herrera and Chavez kind of shifting positions in the midfield, and they filled this in the first 2 games. After the Cup, Eric Sanchez appears most often, but we have Romo, who we met as a central midfielder, coming into the position, especially towards the end. And then in the friendlies, we get a lot of variation in this position, which we won't go into. So Eric Sanchez, again, only started half of the games, but kind of the primary player in this right midfield position. All right, let's move on to the attacking end of the field, and we look at left attackers. And just to summarize this position, in the 4-3-3, it would be a left forward role, and they do favor that formation. In the 4-2-3-1, it is a left attacking midfielder role. And in the Gold Cup, I believe twice they had left wingers, which were also played by these players. For the left attackers, then we have Orbelin Pineda, who is coded as a central midfielder, but has been playing primarily here, and he is a definite candidate. And we have a likely candidate in Irving Lozano. He plays on the right side too, but we put him here. I think he started a little more on this side. And then we have possible but unlikely Alexis Vega, who's actually coded as a forward, and we've moved him over here. Okay, let's look at the players. We won't actually go into detail on Alexis Vega. He really wasn't selected much over this period, and 12 matches he missed, including the last 5. So kind of drifting off the team, although he was a starter in the World Cup, as we'll see in the summary. But let's look at the definite candidate, Orbelin Pineda. He's 28 years old and has 68 caps and 10 goals since 2016. And he plays for AEK Athens in Greece since 2023. Actually was on loan to them the year before that. And he's been around since 2016, but the 2019 Gold Cup, sorry, the 2017 Gold Cup was his first tournament, and we won't go into much detail on that. Just the last 2. He was selected for the World Cup in 2022, just 1 appearance there. A start, though, in Game 3 of that tournament, but was a starter in the 2023 Gold Cup, starting all games except Game 3 for that one. So Orbelin Pineda has started 12 of their 22 games since the beginning of 2023, also subbed in for 5 games there. He did miss 5 matches, but 4 of them were right at the beginning of this period. So Orbelin Pineda, a definite candidate here. The other one is Irving Lozano, a likely candidate. He's 28 years old and has 70 caps and 18 goals since 2016. And he plays for PSV Eindhoven in the Netherlands since 2023. He was in Napoli in Italy before that. And he's been part of all tournaments, really. Missed a couple of Gold Cups there. Injuries kind of plague him in Gold Cups a little bit. He was injured moments, 18 minutes into the 2021 Gold Cup, so missed the rest of the tournament after that. But he was a starter in the 2022 World Cup. However, for the 2023 Gold Cup, he was also out with a knee injury, just as he had been for the 2019 Gold Cup. So Irving Lozano struggling with injuries, but is not, so far as we know, injured for this one. Lozano started 6 of their 22 games since the beginning of 2023. But he's been missing a lot to injuries, so seems a bit injury prone. Missed 11 matches due to injury and has since recovered. So on the basis of participation, we'd see him maybe as a possible candidate, but certainly we know if he's fit, he'd be selected. So Irving Lozano, we settled on a likely categorization for him. And Alexis Vega, we won't talk about. He comes up in the summary, though, which we'll jump to. So it was Alexis Vega playing this left attacking position in the World Cup. The position was not actually used in Game 2 against Argentina, but he played on the left side of a 2-man forward line there. And we're going to see that actually no forward was selected for that game, but the left attacker and the right attacker playing as a 2-man forward line. However, Alexis Vega virtually disappeared after that. And after some messiness in the 2023 Nations League finals, which saw the manager lose his job, Pineda seized the role in the Gold Cup. After that, though, Lozano played the spot more, and Pinedo moved back more into a central midfield role there as a left midfielder. But again, here in this position, there was all sorts of variety in the friendlies, which became quite complex. So we're just going to leave that out of the discussion. And rightly so, I think. We're trying to look at the starters for Mexico and ignoring the friendlies. Maybe focuses on the starters. Over to the right attacking midfield position, we have Uriel Antuna as a definite candidate. Okay, I see that I have put players in the wrong spot here, so I'm just gonna do a little edit here and fix that up. Okay, there we are, and we have the players back in the places where they're supposed to be, and we're moving on to right attackers here. So we have a definite candidate in Uriel Antuna, and Irving Lozano is coded as a right winger, and he does play over here, but we moved him to the left there. And here we have several players seemingly off the squad. So really the only viable candidate, Uriel Antuna. We have Ozil Herrera as seemingly off the squad, Alfonso Gonzalez, and Jesus Manuel Corona. We'll put him in the retired category. He may not be retired, but as we said at the beginning of section 1, been off the team for long enough that we're putting him in the retired category. Okay, let's go back and talk about Uriel Antuna. So he's 26 years old. He has 60 caps and 14 goals for Mexico since 2019, and he plays for Cruz Azul in Mexico since 2022. Was with Manchester City in England from 2017 to 19, or at least on their roster. He was loaned out in that period. As far as tournament goes, he was a starter in the 2019 Gold Cup, but chosen for the Olympic squad for the 2021 version. For the World Cup, he was a substitute in all three games there, and then in the 2023 Gold Cup, a starter in all but the B team game. Since the beginning of 2023, Antuna has started 15 of their 22 games and was on the bench for 5 others. So just 2 matches that he was not selected for, and that's why we consider him a definite candidate to make the squad here. And that's it. Those are the only main candidates here, or the only main candidate. So in a summary of the position, like Vega on the left, it was Lozano on the right in the World Cup, also playing as a right forward against Argentina. After the Cup, Antuna took over even more firmly than Pineda had on the left side. Basically, he remained there for the whole period. For the few games he was out, it was Lozano coming over or Pineda. But that was rare. I think it was just 1 game for each of them, not counting the friendlies. So, yes, again, some variation in the friendlies, which would only complicate matters here. So we won't delve into it. We do expect to see Antuna starting this position in the upcoming Cup. Let's move on to the last midfielder position in the central attacking midfield, and just talk about the position a bit, because it doesn't exist in the 4-3-3 formation. However, in the 4-2-3-1 formation, which they use 30% of the time, it does exist. The candidate here is just at the just at the possible level. It's Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, who, like most of the others, is coded as a central midfielder, but we've moved him here. He only started 4 games. 2 of them, or at least 2 of them, were as an attacking midfielder here. And I think 2 of the others were in friendlies. So Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, a possible candidate. And we also have possible but unlikely Sebastian Cordoba. So we won't talk about him unless he makes the squad, and we'll come back to him in part 2 if he does. So let's look at Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, 27 years old with 49 caps and no goals since 2019. And he also plays for Cruz Azul in Mexico since 2022. What am I talking about? And he has been part of tournaments, basically a sub in World Cup 2022 and Gold Cup 2023. So selected for both of those tournaments. Over this period, he's also been a sub more than a starter. He started 4 of their 22 games, but he was a sub for 6 of them and on the bench for 7 others. So just 5 matches that he wasn't selected for, Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, but again, more of a substitute than a starter. All right, that's the end of the midfield, and we go to forwards here, and we do have 1 player in the secondary striker position, but really he's a forward, and I've decided to talk about him as a secondary striker. Now I can't remember why I made that decision, but anyway, let's get on with it. It's the likely candidate Henry Martin, and yeah, I'll talk about the position and the player once I introduce him. So Henry Martin is 31 years old, 43 caps and 9 goals since 2015, and he plays for Copa America in Mexico since 2017. He's always played in Mexico. Even though 2015 was when he joined Mexico, it took until the 2022 World Cup for him to actually make a tournament, and there he started 2 of the 3 games, and in the Gold Cup in 2023 he started all of the games except the B team game there. Since the start of 2023, Henry Martin has started 10 of their 22 games, as well as subbing in for 4 and being on the bench for 3. So just 5 matches he wasn't selected for, and we have him as a likely candidate. The secondary striker position is not used. And maybe I put him here just to emphasize that he would seem to be the logical central attacking midfielder, but he's not. He gets his starts as a centre forward, Martin. So we could put him as the definite or as the likely candidate as a forward here. But we'll leave him where he is and look at the players coded as forwards. We have a definite candidate in Santiago Jimenez. And we have a likely candidate in Raul Jimenez. And a possible candidate in Roberto Alvarado. We did move Alex Vega over to the left attacking position, and then we have a couple of players who are seemingly off the squad. One is a new player, Roberto De La Rosa, been with the team since 2023, but really just is on the very fringes of the team. The other one is Rogelio Funes Mori, who looked like he was going to be a more important player for the squad than he has turned out to be. And actually, both of these players are seemingly off the squad. So again, we'll come back to them if they make the final squad. Let's look at the candidates, though. Santiago Jimenez is 23 years old, and he has 25 caps and 4 goals. Been with Mexico since 2021, and he plays for Feyenoord in Mexico since 2022 there. Sorry, Feyenoord in the Netherlands, I should say. His first tournament was the Gold Cup in 2023. He did make the preliminary squad, the 31-man preliminary squad for the World Cup, but not the final cut there. And in Gold Cup 2023, he was the secondary player behind Martin there. So he did start game 3, the B team game against Qatar, and he got just countless chances in there as well. He did sub into all other of the 5 games in that 2023 Gold Cup, so we saw quite a bit of him. Over the period since the beginning of 2023, he started just 6 of their 22 games. But he did sub in for 10 and was on the bench for 5. So just one match that he was not selected for, unlike Martin, who was not selected for 5 matches. So that is why we have Jimenez as a definite and Martin as a likely, even though Martin is really the starter for the most part. We also have a likely candidate here in Raul Jimenez, so a real veteran for the team, 33 years old now, with 112 caps and 33 goals, and he's been with Mexico since 2013. He is still with Wolverhampton in England and has been since 2019 with them. He also played for Benfica in Portugal and Atletico Madrid in Spain, so quite a good resume there, and has been in many tournaments there, including selection for the 2022 World Cup, where he was selected, but just a sub in that tournament. He was injured, or so it was said, because I couldn't really get good information on his absence for the 2023 Gold Cup. He was on the preliminary squad there, but didn't make the final cut. And as there was some suggestion that it was injury. They did bring an A team to that cup there, unlike USA and Canada. Recently, over the past, since the beginning of 2023, Jimenez has only started 3 of their 22 games, but he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 2, and not selected for 14 others. So that seems a bit low for a player we're putting as a likely candidate. Perhaps his starts have been recent, or perhaps it's kind of the lack of candidates here. Maybe we're wrong in calling him likely, but we'll leave it where it's at. So Raul Jimenez there. And finally, Roberto Alvarado is 25 years old. He has 44 caps and 5 goals for Mexico since 2018, and he plays for Guadalajara in Mexico. His whole career has been in Mexico, as many of these players are. Alvarado was a substitute in the World Cup 2022 and in the Gold Cup in 2023. He subbed into all 3 games in the recent all 6 games, I should say, in the recent Gold Cup, but not so much of a starter. He started 3 of their 22 games since the beginning of 2023, but he was subbed in for 8 and on the bench for 4. However, he hasn't been fielded for the last 7 matches. So that includes benching and non-selection. So drifting off the squad a bit, it seems, Roberto Alvarado. Okay, those are our candidates, and we'll include Martin in the discussion of the summary of the positions. So as we saw in the World Cup, it was Henry Martin in 2 games out of the 3. And then in that other game, we saw the left attacker and right attacker play as a 2-man front line. So Vega and Lozano. The 2 2023 Nations League final games were a bit messy in terms of selection, part of the reason the manager lost his job there, Coca. So we'll just kind of pick it up after that. Martin did start one of those games, and then he was a starter in the Gold Cup. Jimenez, he did actually start the 3rd place match in that messy Nations League situation, and he did start the B team game in the Gold Cup, and otherwise he started several friendlies. Recently 2 friendlies, and we also saw Raul Jimenez play in 2 friendlies in recent times. But in short, Martin was the starter for all of the important games. And just one odd detail, that in one of the Gold Cup games, he was paired alongside, I want you to guess who he might be paired with as a 2-man forward line. Yes, you're right. It's right midfielder Eric Sanchez joining him in the attack. That was a bit of a surprise to me. Mexico played 5 friendlies in the fall of 2023, September and October there. Martin didn't start in any of those. And in one of the November games that qualified them for this tournament, he only started one of them. So I'm kind of thinking it might foreshadow a change in the forward line. Although I must say Martin did start both games in March 2024. I just sense that there might be a bit of a change coming to the starting forward. However, over the recent period, Martin has held a pretty firm grip on it. Okay, that brings us to the end of our of section 2, our look at the players. Closing thoughts. Well, what I really stand out here, I always kind of dread doing Mexico because they have so many players to deal with, and we're not always sure which players are the A team or the B team players, but usually they have many players for each position. I did say this in the intro, that even now, if you look at their Wikipedia page, it's a very long list of players, but they seem to have gone out of their way over the recent period to kind of reduce it to really to 2 starters, or sorry, a starter and a backup for each position. We do see a lot of rotation in the midfield, but it is the same players rotating. So I think they've tried to reduce the variety in the squad and really nail down the starting lineup. Having said that, when you look at their friendlies, that's where it becomes a bit of a rat's nest of players coming in and coming out, and very difficult to judge who would be the starters just by looking at those. Okay, I'm going to take another little editing pause here to prepare for our review of starters. And we are back to at the top of our list to look at the starters. So we're going to say Jaime Lozano is the manager, and we'll call him a starter, as in we think he will keep his job at least until the Cup. For goalkeepers, we're pretty confident about Guillermo Ochoa. He started all of the important games, not captain of the team anymore. I'm not sure what happened there. But it looks like Edson Alvarez has become captain of the team. Luis Malagon, we're also pretty confident that he's the backup there. But we're just trying to name the starters here. In central defense, definitely Johan Vasquez. And, probably Cesar Montes. Not as guaranteed as Vasquez is, but there are so few candidates that we're just dying to see who plays in the June friendlies and in the Cup. Really surprising that no other names have really popped up here. Left back, Jesus Gallardo has a real firm grip on the position, so we can confidently name him as a starter. A little less certainty about the right side. We're pretty sure it'll be Jorge Sanchez, but I'm going to put it in blue because he hasn't actually started as many games as Gallardo has on the left, but I think he'll be the starter. Over to the midfield, in central midfield, well, we think definitely Edson Alvarez will be a starter, even if it's just a single man position. If they go with the 4-4-3, he'll generally be the center of that 4-4-3. Luis Romo, maybe not quite enough starts for us to say that he is a definite here. I'm just trying to decide whether to put him in blue or not, but he's only started 12 of their 22 games, so I won't commit to that. But probably I wouldn't be surprised to see him starting. Left midfielder, Luis Chavez does have enough starts for us to think that he will be the starter, not necessarily as the left midfield because they shuffle around a bit there. But I do expect, or we do expect to see him in the central midfield there. In the right midfield, we have Eric Sanchez, who did start as a forward in the Gold Cup, surprisingly. Again, not quite enough starts for us to confidently name him. I think we would put Eric Sanchez and Luis Romo kind of in blue, but we're just looking at the definite candidates here, so I wouldn't say Eric Sanchez is definite. Over to left attackers. Well, Orbelin Pineda started basically in the first part of the period from the beginning of 2023, but towards the end didn't play as much. Moved back to central midfield a bit, but only ultimately started half of their games over this time. So we're not going to nominate him, although, quite likely we'll see him starting at least some games. Irving Lozano, I think possibly even more likely than Orbelin Pineda if he's fit. But during this period, he's been injured quite a bit, started only 6 games, so we can't really highlight him. Pretty sure it'll be one or the other over there. Meanwhile, on the right side, we have Uriel Antuna, and he is more certain than either of the two on the left side. He started 15 of their games, so we're pretty sure he'll be starters. And a lot of those times he didn't start were during friendlies or less important games, so Antuna kind of almost always there. Central attackers, well, the main one seems to be Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, and I don't know if I mentioned in the main podcast that right midfielder Eric Sanchez also started in this role twice. So Eric Sanchez is a bit of a versatile player, likely to be a starter, but Carlos Alberto Rodriguez did start in this position the other 2 times they used it, but or 2 of the 6 times they used it, but certainly not enough to nominate him as a starter here as a central attacking midfielder. Henry Martin, I said I had a kind of a couple of hints that he might not be as much a starter as he has been over the period, but based on the evidence of the period, he started as the centre forward almost all the time, especially in important games. So Henry Martin, wait a minute, he's only started 10 of the games, and yet I do kind of see him as the starter. So um, I'm going to go with him as a starter. I wonder if I made a mistake there. He's subbed in for 4, on the bench for 3, not selected for 5. Okay, I better change that to blue. Yeah, so that's one of the hints. Maybe one of the hints that make me think that either Santiago Jimenez or Raul Jimenez could possibly come in and replace him. More likely Santiago Jimenez. All right, that brings us to the end of our race through the squad, and we go to a review of injuries. And this section is blessedly short for Mexico because as of this time, they have no injury concerns. So we can erase that. Erase the template we had there in our YouTube visual and replace it with sorry, my throat's a little dry and I had to cough. Replace it with no injury concerns in bright green. All right, well, the injuries is really the last part of section 3. So we move on to our kind of conclusion where we talk about what we're going to do in part 2. And really, we'll just kind of go through the list again and look at the candidates we had. We'll note any notable non-selections, so that would be definite or likely players on that list. Any surprise inclusions, which could include new players or players coming back from not being used much. And we will update any injuries. Mexico will hope that the situation will remain as it is now with no injury concerns. All right, all that to come in part 2, and we hope you enjoyed looking at our look at the candidates here in part 1. We would like to thank Paul Udin and Pixabay for the wonderful background music accompanying this mediacast. The piece is called Victory Epic Music.